The sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge of Blackwood National Park when I arrived for my first day. Dew still clung to the pines, catching the morning light. After 3 years of environmental policy work from behind a desk, I'd finally made it to where I wanted to be. Actually protecting nature instead of just writing about it. The main ranger station was smaller than I expected. Inside smelled of coffee and pine-scented cleaner. "Torres? Linda Torres?" A man's voice called from behind a desk stacked with paperwork. "Yes, sir." I straightened my newly pressed uniform, still stiff from the packaging. Senior Ranger Wilson stood to greet me. He was taller than I expected. "Welcome to Blackwood. Your partner should be here any minute." He checked his watch. "Martinez is always on time, if nothing else." The door swung open behind me. I turned to see a man in his late 40s. His uniform showed signs of real use. "Steve, this is Linda Torres, your new partner." Wilson's tone changed. "Make sure she understands how we do things here." Steve Martinez nodded once. "Let's get started then." No handshake, no welcome. Just a curt nod and immediate business. This wasn't the warm Ranger camaraderie I'd imagined. For the next week, Steve showed me around efficiently. He pointed out the trails we maintained, the campsites we monitored, and the routes we patrolled. His explanations were thorough but cold. "We never patrol after sunset without proper equipment," he said on our second day as we drove back to the station before dusk. "Always in pairs, always stay on designated roads after dark." "What about emergencies?" I asked. "Lost hikers, medical evacuations?" Steve's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Special protocols for those. You'll learn if necessary." By Friday, I was beginning to wonder if I'd made a mistake coming to Blackwood. I'd spent the week checking trail markers, restocking informational pamphlets, and warning tourists not to feed the squirrels. Meanwhile, Steve handled all the interesting calls. A minor injury at Eagle Point, reports of unusual animal activity near the lake, a possible illegal campsite deeper in the forest. I was organizing supplies in the station when Steve's radio crackled to life. "Dispatch to Ranger Martinez." Steve unclipped his radio. "Martinez here. We've got reports of abandoned trash at Pinewood Site B, possible environmental hazard." Steve's posture changed instantly. He glanced at his watch, then at me. "Copy that. We'll check it out." He clipped the radio back to his belt. "Grab your jacket, Torres. Time you learned about cleanup duty." I followed him to our truck, trying to match his suddenly brisk pace. Finally, something beyond basic duties. "What kind of trash are we dealing with?" I asked as we pulled away from the station. Steve didn't answer immediately. "Doesn't matter what kind. The rule is we clean it up and document it properly." He glanced at the darkening sky. "We have 3 unwritten rules at Blackwood. First, never patrol alone. Second, don't leave designated roads after sunset. Third, always carry the special cleanup kit in the truck." I noticed he was driving faster than usual. "That seems excessive for trash collection," I said. Steve looked at me briefly. "This isn't a typical national park, Torres. Blackwood has its, peculiarities. Best you understand that early." The trees grew denser around us, blocking more light. I told myself it was just my imagination. As we rounded a curve, I noticed Steve's right hand drop from the wheel, checking his sidearm in its holster. The casual movement sent a chill through me. What kind of trash collection required a firearm check? "We're about 5 minutes out," Steve said. "When we get there, you follow my lead. Do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. This isn't the time for questions." The truck's headlights cut through gathering darkness, illuminating a sign ahead. "Pinewood Campsite. B. 1 mile." "I don't understand," I said. "What's really going on here?" "You will soon enough. Some things at Blackwood can't be explained in training manuals. They have to be seen." We pulled into Pinewood Site B just as twilight gave way to night. The campsite looked abandoned, a fire pit with cold ashes, an overturned camping chair, and food wrappers scattered across the ground. The sight of ordinary trash was almost a relief after Steve's cryptic warnings. but something still felt off. The place was too quiet. "Let's get this cleaned up," Steve said, already moving with practiced efficiency. He tossed me a pair of thick gloves and a trash bag. "Start near the picnic table. I'll check the perimeter." I worked methodically, collecting candy wrappers and empty beer cans. The mundane task didn't ease my anxiety, especially when I noticed Steve wasn't really collecting trash, but examining the ground with his flashlight, moving in an expanding spiral pattern from the campsite. "Find anything interesting?" I called out, trying to sound casual. Steve grunted without looking up. "Just keep cleaning, Torres." The night grew colder as we worked. A light breeze moved through the pines, carrying a faint smell I couldn't identify. Something metallic and wrong. I followed my nose, moving toward a large boulder at the edge of the campsite. That's when I saw it. Behind the boulder lay a body. Not just dead, but torn apart. Intestines pulled out, chest cavity splayed open. The face was frozen in a scream, eyes wide with terror that death hadn't erased. I stumbled backward, my trash bag dropping from suddenly numb fingers. "Steve!" My voice came out as a strangled whisper. I tried again, louder. "Steve!" He was beside me in seconds, his flashlight beam joining mine on the awful scene. I expected shock, horror, even panic, but Steve's face showed only resignation. "Damn it," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was hoping we wouldn't find one tonight." "One?" I stared at him, unable to process his calm reaction. "There's a dead body, a murdered person, and you're acting like you found a piece of litter." Steve avoided my eyes. "Take photos. Document everything. I'll call it in." "Shouldn't we, I don't know, secure the scene or something?" My police procedural knowledge seemed woefully inadequate. "Just take the photos, Torres." Steve's voice hardened. "Full body, close-ups of wounds, surrounding area, standard protocol." Nothing about this felt standard, but I pulled out my park-issued camera with shaking hands. Each click of the shutter captured another horror. The unnatural angle of the limbs, the expression of terror, the way the wounds didn't look like any animal attack I'd ever studied. Steve returned from the truck as I finished. "Authorities are on their way. 30 minutes. He knelt beside the body and opened a metal container I hadn't noticed him carrying. Inside was a fine white powder. "What is that?" I asked. "Standard protocol for contamination." Steve began sprinkling the powder over the remains. "Stop. You're contaminating evidence." I moved to grab his arm, but he shrugged me off. "This is how we handle these situations, Torres. You want to work at Blackwood, you follow procedure." I watched in disbelief as the powder made contact with blood and tissue. A chemical reaction began immediately. The remains started to dissolve, breaking down into a viscous green liquid that seeped into the soil. "What the hell is happening?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Steve continued methodically applying the powder. "We need to neutralize biological hazards." "That's a person." My shock was giving way to anger. "Not a hazardous spill." Steve finally looked at me, his expression unreadable in the harsh flashlight beam. "Not anymore." By the time headlights appeared on the access road, the body was gone, replaced by damp soil with a faint greenish tint. 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser, looking bored rather than alert. "Martinez," one nodded to Steve. "Got another one?" Steve handed them a canvas bag I hadn't seen before. "Found this at the site. Probably belongs to a hiker." The officer barely glanced inside. "We'll log it. Anything else?" "Routine cleanup, all documented. They didn't ask about the missing body. They didn't look around the scene. They didn't take statements." "Wait," I started, but Steve's hand closed around my arm in a warning grip. "That's all, officers. We've handled the site cleanup as required." After they left, I wrenched my arm free. What the hell just happened? Why didn't they investigate the murder? "Get in the truck, Torres." Steve's voice left no room for argument. The drive back was tense. I tried to ask questions, but every time I started to speak, Steve cut me off. I don't know what I saw back there, I finally managed. But I know what I didn't see, a proper investigation of a homicide. Steve's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. You saw a routine cleanup of abandoned camping equipment, that's all. A man was dead, murdered, and you dissolved his body. Torres. Steve's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. For your own good, forget what you think you saw tonight. Some things at Blackwood are better left alone. Is that a threat? It's advice from someone who wants you to have a long career. We rode the rest of the way in silence. Back at the ranger station, I noticed the mood immediately. The night shift rangers exchanged glances when we walked in. A conversation near the coffee machine stopped abruptly. Another one at Pinewood? I heard someone whisper when Steve walked past. Third this month. They're getting more frequent, came the hushed reply. I kept my head down, pretending not to hear, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. This wasn't an isolated incident. The other rangers knew about it, whatever it was. After Steve left for the night, I waited until the station was quiet before slipping into the records room. I pulled the incident logs for the day, flipping to Pinewood Site B. There it was, not a murder investigation, not even a death report. Just a single line. Routine cleanup of abandoned campsite, all materials properly disposed of. I sat back. The Rangers of Blackwood were hiding something significant, something they'd go to extreme lengths to keep secret. And Steve Martinez was right in the middle of it. Whatever had killed that poor camper, whatever had reduced a human being to green sludge, whatever made veteran rangers speak in code, it was all connected. And now I was connected too. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mutilated body, the green liquid, and Steve's face. Not surprised, not horrified, but resigned. Like he'd seen it all before and expected to see it again. A week passed after the Pinewood incident. I did my ranger duties, checking trails, assisting tourists, filling out boring paperwork. But my mind kept going back to the mutilated body and its chemical dissolution. Every night I woke in a cold sweat, seeing that green residue seeping into the soil. Every day I searched for answers from other rangers, finding only avoided looks and abrupt changes in conversation whenever I entered a room. The silence was maddening. I needed answers, and Steve was the only one who might provide them. I found my opportunity late Tuesday afternoon in the break room. Steve stood by the coffee maker, alone for once. He poured himself a cup, his back to the door, unaware of my presence until I deliberately let the door swing closed behind me. The sharp click made his shoulders tense. We need to talk about what happened at Pinewood, I said, moving to block the exit. Steve didn't turn right away. Nothing happened at Pinewood, just a routine cleanup. A man was murdered. You dissolved his body with some kind of chemical. The official report doesn't mention any of it. I stepped closer. I'm not leaving until you explain. Steve finally faced me, his eyes darting to the windows and door before settling on my face. He set his coffee down and checked his watch. Not here. He moved to the door, opened it slightly, and looked down the hallway. Follow me. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain, but followed him to a small storage closet near the back of the station. Steve ushered me inside, closed the door, and pulled the chain on a single bare bulb. Ask your questions. His voice was flat, resigned. What happened to that camper? Why did you destroy the evidence? Why did those officers act like it was routine? Steve leaned against a shelf of cleaning supplies. Because it was routine. For Blackwood. That doesn't make sense. Blackwood isn't like other parks, Torres. It's what some of the old-timers call a no-man's land, a place where normal rules don't apply. I crossed my arms. What does that mean? It means there are things in these woods that don't show up in any ranger training manual. Steve's eyes bore into mine. Strange creatures. They roam certain areas. Sometimes they claim victims. Our job isn't just to maintain trails and help lost hikers. It's to clean up these incidents and prevent panic. Creatures. What kind of creatures? Steve's face hardened. Knowing more puts you in danger. The less you know, the safer you are. That's not acceptable. I stood my ground. I saw a man torn apart. I helped cover it up without understanding why. I deserve the full truth. What you deserve and what's good for you aren't the same thing. Steve checked his watch again. Look, you've got two choices. Request a transfer to another park and forget what you saw, or accept that some questions don't have answers you want to hear. He brushed past me and opened the door. Think about it, Torres. Really think about whether you want to know what's out there. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. That night in my small ranger cabin, I took out a notebook and began listing what I knew. The body at Pinewood had been mutilated in ways that didn't match any animal attack I'd studied. The rangers had protocols for these incidents: the white powder, the cryptic radio codes, the paperwork that omitted crucial details. Other rangers knew about it. I'd overheard them discussing another one when Steve and I returned to the station. If Steve wouldn't give me answers, I'd find them myself. Over the next few days, I spent every free moment in the records room, reviewing incident reports dating back months. Most were mundane: lost hikers, minor injuries, permit violations, but scattered among them were those labeled routine cleanup with minimal details. I plotted these incidents on a small personal map of the park, looking for patterns. 3 nights later, I made my first breakthrough. Every cleanup had occurred during the new moon. The locations varied but clustered in certain regions of the park: the northern ridge, the eastern valley, and the western lake area. The puzzle was taking shape, but pieces were still missing. My chance came Friday night when I volunteered for the late shift. After the last ranger left around 11, I began methodically searching areas of the station I hadn't explored. The supply room had always struck me as oddly large from the outside but cramped inside. I examined its back wall, pushing against shelving units until one moved slightly, revealing a seam in the wall. I pulled the shelf further, exposing a hidden door with a simple padlock. The lock was old, easy to pick with a credit card and patience. The door swung open to reveal a windowless room, lit by a single fluorescent light that flickered on when I found the switch. What I saw stopped me cold. The walls held weapons I'd never seen before. Specialized rifles with unusual modifications, what looked like flamethrowers, and containers of various sizes. On a center table sat plastic bins of the white powder Steve had used at Pinewood. But what drew me forward was a large map of Blackwood pinned to the far wall. It matched official maps in outline but contained markings I'd never seen: skull symbols in the exact regions where I'd noted cleanup incidents. Red circles marked areas labeled feeding grounds, avoid during new moon. Yellow lines traced what appeared to be migration patterns between seasons. This wasn't wildlife management. This was something else entirely. Beneath the map, pinned with a tack, was a handwritten note. If you see something, say nothing. Don't investigate. I pulled out my phone and began photographing the map and its markings. Whatever was happening in Blackwood went beyond a few covered-up incidents. This was systematic. I was so focused on documenting everything that I didn't hear the door open behind me. I was afraid you'd find this place. I spun around to face Senior Ranger Wilson standing in the doorway. My throat closed, mind racing for explanations that wouldn't come. But instead of anger, Wilson's face showed something unexpected: pity. I told Martinez you were too curious for your own good. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Smart enough to piece things together, but not smart enough to leave well enough alone. What is all this? I managed to ask, gesturing at the map. Wilson sighed deeply. Insurance, protection, the tools we need to maintain the balance. Balance between what? Between what belongs in this world and what doesn't. Wilson approached the map, tracing one of the skull markings with his finger. This park has secrets older than the service itself. The body at Pinewood was unfortunate, but inevitable. Wilson turned to me, his expression grave. We can't stop what happens here, Torres. We can only contain it, clean up afterward, and keep the public from learning things that would cause panic. I stood my ground. The public deserves to know if they're in danger. Do they? And what happens when the military descends on Blackwood? When scientists try to capture these things for study? When the delicate arrangement we've maintained for decades collapses? Wilson shook his head. The death toll would be catastrophic. The casual way he discussed potential mass casualties chilled me to the bone. Wilson checked his watch. It's late. Go back to your cabin, Torres. You should request a transfer tomorrow morning. His voice softened. Before you see too much to leave. What does that mean? It means some knowledge can't be unlearned. Wilson opened the door. And once certain entities notice you noticing them, leaving becomes complicated. He gestured toward the exit, a clear dismissal. I walked past him, still processing everything. As I reached the supply room, Wilson called after me. Torres, I turned. Delete those photos, for your own sake. I nodded without commitment and left. Back in my cabin, I stared at the photos on my phone, evidence of something beyond understanding, and wondered what my next move should be. Wilson had given me a way out, transfer and forget. But something told me forgetting Blackwood might not be as simple as driving away. After Wilson left me alone in my cabin, I stared at the photos on my phone until my eyes burned. Sleep never came that night. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I wrote my resignation letter at first light. The words flowed easily, professional language masking my true reasons for leaving. I couldn't be part of whatever horrific cover-up was happening at Blackwood. The mutilated body at Pinewood, the white powder, the conspiratorial silence among veteran rangers. It was too much. The letter sat folded in my pocket as I walked to the station that morning. I'd give it to Wilson after completing tonight's final shift with Steve. One more night, then I could leave this place behind. Steve was already at the station when I arrived, checking equipment with meticulous care. He barely glanced up when I entered. Tonight we're patrolling the Northern Ridge Road, he said, his voice flat and practical. Standard route. My stomach tightened. Northern Ridge, one of the areas marked with skull symbols on the hidden map. Not a coincidence. Any particular reason? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Steve's eyes met mine briefly. Just routine. We prepared in silence. I noticed Steve checking his sidearm more thoroughly than usual and loading a specialized rifle I hadn't seen before into our truck. When he thought I wasn't looking, he slipped several vials of the white powder into his jacket pocket. The drive to the Northern Ridge began just before sunset. Dark clouds covered the sky, blocking the daylight early. Our headlights barely lit up the first few trees. Weather report mentioned a new moon tonight, Steve said, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. Visibility will be poor. New moon. Another detail from my investigation, every cleanup incident had occurred during a new moon. There were too many coincidences to ignore. Want to tell me what we're really doing out here? I asked. Steve's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Patrol, just like any other night. On a new moon? In an area marked with skulls on a map you thought I wouldn't find? His jaw clenched, but he said nothing, just pushed our speed a little faster as darkness settled completely around us. 3 hours into our patrol, we'd seen nothing but empty road and the occasional deer. The radio remained silent. No campers to check on, no hikers to assist. The Northern Ridge was deserted, or so it seemed. I was beginning to think the night would pass without incident when our headlights caught movement on the road ahead. Steve braked hard, the truck skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder. A man crawled along the double yellow line, his clothes torn and bloody. He raised a hand to shield his eyes from our headlights. "Help!" His voice carried clearly through the night. "Please, my wife. She's in danger." Steve didn't move immediately. I watched his right hand move to his sidearm. "Stay in the truck," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "No matter what happens, stay inside with the doors locked. We can't just promise me, Torres." Something in his tone made me nod. "I promise." Steve checked his weapon, then slowly exited the vehicle. I watched through the windshield as he approached the injured man, maintaining a careful distance. "Where are you injured, sir?" Steve called out, his flashlight beam illuminating the man's blood-soaked shirt. "My wife," the man repeated, ignoring the question. "At our campsite. Something attacked us." "I understand," Steve said, his voice steady. "We'll get help. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" The injured man went still, too still. His head tilted at an unnatural angle as he looked up at Steve. "Do you want to see?" he asked, his voice suddenly different, deeper, with a strange resonance that made my skin crawl. The man lunged at Steve with impossible speed, covering the distance between them in a blur. Steve fired instantly, the gunshot echoing through the forest. The bullet hit the man squarely in the chest, but he didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled, a terrible, too-wide smile that split his face unnaturally. "That tickles," the thing said in that resonant voice. I watched in frozen horror as the man's body began to change. His limbs elongated, joints bending backward with audible cracks. His skin split along his arms and face, peeling back to reveal something pale and glistening underneath. Not muscle or bone, something else entirely. Steve fired again and again, backing toward the truck. The creature advanced relentlessly, its movements jerky, yet somehow fluid. Finally, Steve aimed carefully and fired a single shot that struck the creature directly between its eyes. It stopped abruptly, swayed, then collapsed to the road. Even then, it continued to transform, its body twisting and reshaping itself as if struggling to look human. Steve pulled out his radio, keeping his gun trained on the creature. "Code Black at Northern Ridge mile marker 17, he said calmly. "Request full cleanup team." The response came immediately. "Copy that. ETA 30 minutes. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the creature. Its body was dissolving, melting into a viscous puddle that gave off a faint greenish glow. The same green residue I'd seen at Pinewood. Steve returned to the truck, his face expressionless as he holstered his weapon. He slid into the driver's seat and turned to me. My body shook uncontrollably. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I'd just witnessed. "That wasn't an animal," I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. "No, it wasn't human either." Steve stared through the windshield at the dissolving remains. "No, it wasn't." "What was it?" I demanded, fear giving way to desperate need for answers. Steve turned to me, his eyes reflecting the green glow from the road. "Something that doesn't belong in our world," he said quietly. "Something science can't explain." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "There are entities in this park, Torres. Things that were here long before it became protected land. Things we've learned to deal with because we have no choice." I thought about the hidden weapons, the map, the white powder. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. "The body at Pinewood?" I asked. "Same thing. Different entity. They don't all look alike." Steve started the engine. "We need to wait for the cleanup team." I stared at the dissolving mass on the road, aware of my resignation letter in my pocket. "I've seen too much," I whispered. Steve didn't argue. "Yes, you have." Sleep evaded me that night. The cleanup team had come with their white powder and equipment, efficiently removing all evidence of the creature that wasn't human or animal. Steve had driven me back to my cabin in silence, only saying, "Come to my place tomorrow morning, 7 sharp. I'll tell you everything." The sun came up while I was still awake, thinking about what I saw, a man changing into something not from this world, bullets that barely slowed it down, and that terrible too-wide smile. My resignation letter still sat in my jacket pocket, but somehow I knew I couldn't leave without understanding what was happening in this park. Steve's cabin stood at the edge of the ranger compound, more isolated than the others. Smoke rose from the chimney against the cold morning air. I knocked, my knuckles barely making contact with the door before it swung open. "You came." Something like relief flashed across Steve's face. "Wasn't sure you would." The interior was Spartan but organized, a small living area with a wood stove, kitchenette, and desk covered with papers. No personal photos, no decorations. Just the necessities and walls of bookshelves filled with volumes on local history, folklore, and what looked like scientific journals. "Coffee?" Steve held up a pot without waiting for my answer, filling a mug and handing it to me. "I saw that thing change," I said, accepting the mug but not drinking. "It wasn't human." Steve nodded, gesturing to a chair by the wood stove. "No, it wasn't. And it wasn't the first." I sat down. "I need the truth. All of it." Steve looked at me for a long moment before moving to his desk. He pulled out an old leather-bound book and several manila folders. "Blackwood isn't just a park," he began, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had rehearsed these words many times. "It's what some of the old-timers call a thin place, somewhere the barrier between our world and others isn't as solid as it should be." "Others?" The coffee grew cold in my hands. "You mean other dimensions? Like science fiction?" "I don't know what to call them. Different realities, maybe." Steve opened one of the folders, revealing black and white photographs of rangers. "What I do know is that Blackwood has been home to entities that existed here long before humans declared it protected land." He handed me the leather-bound book. "This journal belonged to Chief Ranger Thomas Elliott, 1923. First official documentation of an encounter." I opened it carefully, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was precise but showed signs of agitation in places, especially when describing creatures beyond comprehension that wore human skin like ill-fitting suits. "These entities," Steve continued, "they can disguise themselves as human, but they need to feed. On people." My stomach churned. "The body at Pinewood." "Yes." Steve's expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed a deep weariness. "And dozens of others over the years. And the Park Service just allows this?" My voice rose in disbelief. "People are being killed, and we're covering it up?" Steve leaned forward. "It's not that simple. There's an arrangement, unspoken but understood. The Rangers cover up incidents, keep visitors away from dangerous areas during certain times, and in exchange, the entities limit their hunting and..." He hesitated. "They keep away worse things." "Worse things?" The journal slipped from my fingers onto my lap. "What could be worse?" "You don't want to know." Steve's voice dropped. "Trust me on that." He retrieved more folders, spreading photos and documents across the desk. Reports spanning decades, all describing similar incidents with clinical detachment. "The white powder," I said, recalling the substance used at Pinewood and by the cleanup team last night. "What is it?" "Developed in the 1950s by a ranger with a chemistry background." Steve held up a vial of the powder. "It neutralizes the residue left behind by the entities. Their biological makeup is toxic to our ecosystem. Left untreated, it spreads like a disease through the soil and water." I remembered the green glow from the dissolving creature. "And the missing people? Their families?" "Officially listed as missing hikers, animal attacks, or accidents." Steve's matter-of-fact tone made it worse somehow. "The service handles death notifications, compensation when possible." The situation was horrible. An entire government agency complicit in covering up predation on innocent people. How do rangers react when they learn the truth? I asked. Steve's expression darkened. Some request transfers immediately. They leave and never look back. Others... He trailed off, staring into his coffee. Others? They disappear. He looked directly at me. Usually after breaking one of the protective rules. Stay in your vehicle at night. Avoid certain trails during the new moon. Never interact with solitary strangers in remote areas. Never deviate from established paths after sunset. Rules I'd heard him mention repeatedly during my first week. Rules that suddenly made terrible sense. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Why not just let me resign and leave? Because you've been marked, Steve said bluntly. That thing on the road last night, it saw you. You're on their radar now. If you leave without understanding what you're up against, you won't last a month. So I'm trapped here? Forever? No. But you need to learn the rules. Really learn them. Steve closed the folders. Some rangers serve their time, learn what they need to know, then transfer to other parks with similar problems. There are more places like Blackwood? Steve nodded grimly. More than the public realizes. A sharp burst of static from Steve's radio cut through the moment. We both turned toward the sound. Dispatch to all available rangers. We have a report of 4 hikers missing from Eagle Point Trail. Last contact approximately 18 hours ago. Vehicle located at trailhead. I felt suddenly scared. Eagle Point, another area I'd seen marked on the hidden map. Steve grabbed his radio. Martinez responding, Torres and I will check it out. Copy that. Be advised, sunset in approximately 4 hours. Steve clipped the radio back to his belt and began moving with practiced efficiency, pulling equipment from a locked cabinet. We can't go out there, I protested. Not after what you just told me. Not after last night. That's exactly why we have to go. Steve checked a specialized rifle similar to the one from last night. 4 people are missing, and night is coming. But I won't let you face your last shift alone. His expression softened slightly. We go in, we check the vehicle, we follow procedure. With luck, we find them before dark. He loaded several vials of white powder into his pack, along with extra ammunition and what looked like specialized flares. Here. Steve handed me a small vial of the powder, just in case. I took it reluctantly, the weight of it disproportionate to its size. What if we find something like last night? I asked, my mouth dry. We follow the rules. Steve shouldered his pack, and pray we make it back to the truck before dark. We headed out to the parking lot where our Ranger vehicle waited. As Steve loaded the last of his equipment, I glanced back at my cabin, the resignation letter still in my pocket. Whether I stayed or left, nothing would ever be the same after today. The sun was setting as our truck pulled into the small gravel lot at Eagle Point Trail. The pickup truck left by the missing hikers sat alone in the fading light. I checked my watch. Less than an hour of daylight remained. We don't have much time, I said, looking at the dense forest ahead of us. Steve parked beside the hiker's truck and immediately went to inspect it. He checked the doors, unlocked, and peered inside at backpacks and water bottles. Everything looked normal, as if the owners had just stepped away for a moment. Standard day packs, he noted, voice flat and professional. Trail map on the dashboard, 4 sets of boots missing from their vehicle. I scanned the surrounding trees, remembering all Steve had told me that morning. Entities that weren't human. Creatures that hunted on the new moon. The weight of the white powder vial felt heavy in my pocket. We need to establish ground rules, Steve said, loading a specialized flashlight into his belt. Stay within sight of each other at all times. Keep to the main trail only. And we return to the truck before full darkness. No exceptions. What if we find survivors who need help? I asked. Steve's face hardened. Then we call for backup and follow procedure. And if we find something else? His eyes met mine. We run. The trail started wide, well maintained for the first quarter mile before narrowing as it wound deeper into the forest. We moved quickly, flashlights out despite the lingering daylight. Steve kept checking his watch and the sun's position through the canopy. Something felt wrong about the forest. The usual background chorus of birds and insects was missing. No rustling in the underbrush, no distant calls of wildlife. Just the sound of our boots on packed dirt and our controlled breathing. "It's too quiet," I whispered. Steve nodded without breaking stride. "They're hiding. Animals sense when predators are near." The thought sent a chill down my spine. About a mile in, we found the first sign of the hikers, a small clearing just off the trail with discarded camping gear. A tent lay half-assembled, sleeping bags unfurled nearby. A camp stove sat cold beside scattered food packets. Steve crouched to examine the scene, his movements careful and methodical. He picked up an energy bar wrapper, turned it over in his gloved hand, then let it drop. "They left in a hurry," he said. "No signs of blood or struggle. That's good, right?" Steve didn't answer. He checked his watch again, jaw tightening. "We need to head back," he said. "Light's fading faster than I expected." I scanned the surrounding forest. "We can't just leave. There are 4 people missing." "Torres." His voice carried a warning. I turned to argue when something caught my eye. A faint orange glow flickering through the trees to our right, maybe 200 yards off the main trail. "Steve, look." I pointed toward the light. "That could be a campfire." His face went rigid. "We're going back, now." "But what if it's the hikers? What if they're still alive and need help?" "It's not them." Steve's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Nothing good has a fire out here after sunset." He grabbed my arm, but I pulled away. I couldn't just walk away if there was even a small chance. "I'll be quick," I said, already moving toward the light. "Just to look to make sure." "Torres, get back on the trail," Steve hissed, but remained where he stood, as if crossing that invisible boundary was unthinkable. I pushed through the underbrush, drawn to the campfire's glow. Branches scratched at my face and arms as I moved deeper into the forest. The silence was complete, making my ears feel strange. The fire came into view first, a perfectly circular campfire burning steadily despite no visible fuel. Then I saw him, a man sitting on a log, facing away from me, staring into the flames. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, suddenly uncertain. "Hello? Park Ranger, are you okay?" The man didn't turn immediately. When he did, the way he moved was wrong somehow, too smooth yet oddly jerky, as if his joints worked differently than they should. "Hello, Park Ranger," he echoed, voice pleasant but flat. "I am okay." He looked ordinary enough, flannel shirt, jeans, hiking boots, but something about his posture seemed off, like he was uncomfortable in his own skin. "I'm Linda Torres," I said, staying at the clearing's edge. "We're looking for 4 hikers who went missing in this area. Have you seen anyone pass through?" The man tilted his head at an angle that stretched his neck too far. "Looking for 4 hikers who went missing in this area." He repeated my words exactly, then paused before adding, "They moved on." Cold crawled up my spine. His voice had changed mid-sentence, changing from the flat tone to something deeper, more resonant. "Moved on where?" I asked, taking a small step backward. "They moved on," he repeated, this time in a higher pitch, almost childlike. "They're part of the forest now." I glanced around the small clearing, looking for signs of the missing hikers. No backpacks, no gear, no indication anyone else had been here. "I should get back to my partner," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man stood up and kept standing. His body unfolded to a height that couldn't be human, limbs extending like a telescope being pulled open. His smile widened too far across his face, revealing rows of teeth that gleamed in the firelight. "Why leave now?" Not John asked, his voice resonating unnaturally. "Your friends will be here soon." He gestured to the darkness beyond the firelight. I saw shapes moving there, elongated silhouettes sliding between trees, converging on the clearing. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity what Steve had been trying to protect me from. This wasn't a man. It was one of the entities, and it had friends. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my face as I crashed through the underbrush. Behind me came a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't contained too many tones layered over each other. "Taurus!" Steve's voice cut through the forest, urgent and afraid. I broke through the tree line onto the main path, gasping. Steve grabbed my shoulders, his face pale in the fading light. "Run," I managed to say. "We need to run." He didn't ask questions, just grabbed my arm and pulled me down the trail toward the parking lot. We sprinted past the abandoned campsite, feet pounding against dirt. The light was nearly gone now. A howl rose behind us. Not wolf, not coyote, not anything I recognized. It was joined by others, a chorus of inhuman voices calling through the darkening forest. "Don't look back," Steve ordered between breaths. "Just run." The truck appeared ahead, a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. Steve fumbled with the keys, hands steady despite everything. The engine roared to life just as I slammed my door shut. Headlights cut through the gathering darkness as we reversed, tires spitting gravel. Through the windshield, I caught glimpses of movement at the trailhead, tall, impossibly thin figures retreating from the light. Steve hit the gas, and we tore down the mountain road, switchbacks forcing him to brake hard at each turn. I kept my eyes on the side mirror, watching the shapes following us along the tree line. They matched our speed effortlessly, hanging back just beyond the reach of our taillights. "They're still behind us," I said, voice shaking. Steve didn't look. "They won't follow us out of their territory. Just don't look directly at them." But I couldn't stop watching. The figures loped alongside the road, their movements fluid yet wrong. When the headlights occasionally swept across them during turns, they retreated into the shadows, as if the light itself caused them pain. As we rounded the final curve and the forest thinned, the shapes fell back. By the time we reached the main park road, they were gone, melted back into the darkness of the forest like they'd never existed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "The hikers, there's nothing we can do," Steve said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Not anymore. We have to report this, call in search parties, get help, and send more people to die." Steve's voice cracked slightly. "The hikers are gone, Torres. The entities got them. Like they almost got me." I suddenly realized, if I hadn't run when I did. Steve was quiet for a long moment, the rumble of the engine filling the silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "You broke the rules," he said. "You left the trail after sunset. You approached one of them." "I didn't know." "It saw you. It spoke to you." His voice tightened. "It marked you." Marked. I remembered what Steve had told me that morning. Some rangers disappear after breaking the protective rules. "What happens now?" I asked, dreading the answer. Steve's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, his profile harsh in the dashboard lights. "Now we report finding no signs of the hikers. We file the paperwork. And tomorrow..." He paused, something like regret crossing his face. "Tomorrow you'll understand why some rangers request transfers and why others can't leave at all." The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as we descended the mountain, leaving Eagle Point and whatever waited there behind us. But looking at Steve's grim expression, I knew we hadn't escaped. Sleep never came after our escape from Eagle Point. I sat at my cabin window until dawn, watching the tree line, jumping at every shadow. My resignation letter, written days ago, felt heavier than ever in my jacket pocket. The morning air bit through my uniform as I walked to the ranger station. Blackwood felt different now, changed by things I couldn't forget. Every rustling leaf, every distant sound meant something new. The forest was now a place where things hunted. The station seemed unusually quiet when I arrived. I headed straight for Senior Ranger Wilson's office, ready to hand in my resignation and get out. but Wilson wasn't there. Instead, I decided to find Steve first. After what we'd experienced together, I owed him a goodbye at least. I knocked on his office door. No answer. I tried the knob and found it unlocked. The room exactly as it always was. Neat, organized, impersonal. Nothing seemed out of place except Steve himself. "Looking for Martinez?" Ranger Collins asked, passing by with a stack of reports. "Yeah. Have you seen him?" I kept my voice casual despite feeling worried. Collins avoided my eyes. Took some unexpected leave. Personal matters. Without saying anything? After what happened last night? His face went blank. Nothing happened last night. Routine search, no incidents. He hurried away before I could respond. Something wasn't right. I headed for the patrol vehicle logs, flipping to last night's entries. There it was, in standard bureaucratic language. Rangers Martinez and Torres conducted routine search at Eagle Point Trail regarding missing hikers. No signs of disturbance found. Search to continue when conditions permit. No mention of the entity by the fire. No mention of our frantic escape through the darkening forest. No mention of the inhuman figures that had pursued our truck. I needed to check Steve's cabin. The walk there took forever. I knocked repeatedly, called his name, then finally tried the door. Unlocked. I pushed it open. The cabin was empty, not just unoccupied, empty. No books on the shelves that had been filled yesterday morning, no coffee pot on the counter, no jackets hanging by the door. The bed was stripped bare, drawers emptied. It was as if Steve Martinez had never existed. This wasn't a hasty departure. Someone had erased all traces of him. I whirled around to find Senior Ranger Wilson standing in the doorway, his face impassive. "What happened to him?" I demanded. Wilson stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He broke the rules. What rules? He was trying to protect me. Precisely. Wilson looked around the empty cabin. Rule number 1, never intervene when the entities select their prey. I was shocked. I was prey. You left the trail after sunset. You approached one of them directly. Wilson's voice remained unnervingly calm. You were marked. Martinez knew that. So he's gone because he helped me? My voice cracked. Where is he? Wilson looked to the window, toward the dense forest beyond. Some questions are better left unanswered, Torres. I felt sick. I need to report this, all of it. The missing hikers, the entities, Steve, and who would believe you? Wilson's tone hardened. Best case, you're labeled unstable and lose your career. Worst case, he trailed off, leaving me to imagine the rest. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. Your final paycheck and a letter of recommendation for your next position. I suggest somewhere urban. Very urban. I stared at the envelope, not taking it. The hikers have families. They deserve to know what happened. The families will be told their loved ones are missing, presumably lost in the wilderness. Search efforts will be documented. Evidence will be fabricated if necessary. His voice dropped lower. This isn't the first time, Torres. It won't be the last. And you just accept that? People dying so these things can feed? Wilson briefly showed emotion on his usually professional face. The alternative is worse. Much worse. He placed the envelope on the bare counter. If you want to leave Blackwood alive, never mention Steve Martinez or what you saw at Eagle Point. To anyone. I watched him walk out, thinking about his warning. Back at my cabin, I began packing immediately, throwing clothes into my duffel bag without folding them. I wanted nothing more than to be far away from this place. As I reached for my jacket, I noticed an envelope that had been slipped under my door. My name was written across the front in Steve's neat handwriting. Inside was a hand-drawn map of what looked like the western United States, with certain routes marked in green ink. Several small towns were circled in red. At the bottom was a brief note. Some knowledge can't be unlearned. Some entities notice those who notice them. I broke a rule to save you. Now I must go. Never return here. S. I studied the map, recognizing it as an escape route, safe passages through areas that might harbor similar threats. Steve had warned me, protected me, and now had paid some unknown price for it. I finished packing within the hour, quickly signed the necessary paperwork, and left my cabin keys on the counter. No one came to say goodbye. The drive to the park entrance seemed to take forever. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see elongated figures sliding between the trees that lined the road. My hands didn't stop shaking until I passed through the main gate, watching it shrink in my mirror until it disappeared around a bend. I spent the next weeks filling out job applications and staying in cheap motel rooms. I applied exclusively to urban planning positions, city park management, anything surrounded by concrete and streetlights, anything far from isolated forests and the darkness they contained. Sleep remained elusive. When it did come, nightmares followed. Visions of that too-wide smile, that fire that burned without fuel, those green eyes watching from between trees. I'd wake gasping, certain I'd heard that layered, multi-toned laughter just outside my window. 3 weeks after leaving Blackwood, I allowed myself to check the local news for that region one final time. A small article mentioned 4 hikers still missing from Eagle Point Trail. According to the report, challenging terrain and weather conditions had hampered search efforts. Authorities were now treating it as a recovery operation rather than a rescue. I closed the browser and deleted my search history. There would be no recovery, no closure for those families. The entities had claimed their prey, and the rangers had covered it up, just as they always did. That evening, I accepted a position with the Chicago Parks Department. The starting salary was lower than what I'd made at Blackwood, but the job description promised crowded parks, well-lit paths, and regular patrol schedules. No remote trails, no new moon protocols. As I signed the acceptance letter, I thought of Steve's warning: never return here. I made a silent promise to myself and to him that I would honor that warning. Blackwood and its secrets would remain behind me, even if the knowledge of what lurked in those woods would never fully leave me. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Some places, once known, can't be unknown. Blackwood was a no-man's land where normal rules didn't apply, and I was one of the few who had escaped to tell the tale even if I never would.